Well, hello and welcome to the latest installment of Sports Lawyers Association's year-long celebration of 50 years of Title IX, what we're calling our Time for Nine series. Today, we're talking about Title IX, Grassroots to the Olympic Games, and a recording of this program and all prior programs and future programs are available on the SLA website. If you go to www.sportslaw.org and then click the events tab and then Title IX, you'll see this program and others we've had. And unfortunately, Allison Rich, the current president of the Sports Lawyers Association, could not attend today, and she sends her regrets. I'm Pam Lester. I'm a former president of the Sports Lawyers Association and happy to step in and help. And before we get started, I just wanted to share a few words about the Sports Lawyers Association and encourage those of you who are not members to join. And if you are a member, encourage you to keep your membership current. Among the many benefits, in addition to programs like these, are a Sports Business Daily subscription, our annual conference, which returns in person this May 12th through 14 in Atlanta, Georgia. There we also have virtual member chats and outreach events, which we hope will be back in person soon. And of course, access to industry leaders and their knowledge of industry and current sports law issues, and a variety of other programming, including sports shorts, mentorship Mondays, podcasts, and webinars with all sorts of great content like we'll hear today. So please feel free to share any ideas that you might have for other programming or events that the Sports Lawyers Association could do with any of the members, or with Melissa Pomerine, our executive director. I also want to thank Melissa for everything she does on behalf of the SLA, as well as Jayma Meyer and Gabe Feldman, the co-chairs of the SLA Title IX committee, and all of our committee members, including, of course, Jill Pilgrim, our moderator today, for all of their hard work in putting together this series. And I think our next event is going to be in April on Title IX and NIL. And with that, let's just get started. It's my pleasure to introduce Jill Pilgrim. Jill is a corporate sports and dispute resolution attorney with Pilgrim & Associates, Arbitration, Law, and Mediation, LLC, and a former Sports Lawyers Association board member. She's the moderator today, and that brief introduction does no justice to her background and everything she continues to do and has done in the world of sports law, but she's asked me to keep my introduction brief. So with that, Jill, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce the program and today's panelists. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I look forward to this.
Thank you, Pam. And I just want to highlight again that the title of this program today is Title IX, Grassroots to the Olympic Games. And in order to take us through that discussion, we have an outstanding panel here for you today. The panel consists of Hall of Fame coach Terry Crawford. She has an outstanding background herself as an athlete. She was a national champion in the 800 meters at the University of Tennessee. She competed internationally as well, having been a member of both the 1971 World University Games US team and the Pan American Games US team. She was also a finalist at the highest levels of track and field in our sport at the 1968 and 1972 track and field Olympic trials. She began her career as a coach at her alma mater, Tennessee, in 1974. She won as the coach. Her and her teams won the first 4 women SEC outdoor championships, as well as the first women's SEC indoor championship. In 1984, she became head women's coach of track and field at the University of Texas at Austin. And in 1972, she became the director of track and field and cross country at California Polytechnic University, San Luis Obispo, California. In 2009, she joined the Olympic governing body, USA Track and Field, as the director of coaching. And her numerous accolades, there's so many I can't go through them at the moment because we would lose the opportunity to hear from her. Numerous national championships to her credit, numerous conference championships, college conference championships to her credits. She has coached several Olympians, including one on this call, on this webinar panel today, and numerous All-Americans, needless to say. So we welcome Terry as part of this panel today. In addition, we are honored to have law professor Kenneth Ferguson of the University of Missouri, Kansas City. He is nationally recognized as a scholar in both sports law and bankruptcy law. He has served as the chair of the sports and law section and the debtors and creditors sections of the American Association of Law Schools. He was a member of the board of directors of USA Track and Field, the national governing body for track and field in the United States, and he has served on numerous committees for the NCAA. Welcome, Ken. Last but not least, we have Benita Fitzgerald Mosley. Bonita is a 100-meter hurdle 1984 Olympic gold medalist. She currently serves as Vice President of Community and Impact and President of Fund Play for League Apps, which is a youth sports management technology platform. She has also in the past served as a chief executive for the United States Olympic Committee, a chief executive at Laureus Sports for Good Foundation USA, the chief of sports performance for USA Track and Field, and she is a graduate of the University of Tennessee with a BS in Industrial Engineering and a charter member of the Tennessee Volunteers Hall of Fame, alongside her coach, no doubt, a dynamic duo. And you do see there is somewhat of a track and field theme to this presentation. So with that being said, we want to get into the conversation with this incredible panel of individuals who have a lot to share. So we're going to move forward. So we're going to start talking about what the landscape for girls and women looked like pre the enactment of Title IX in 1972. And for this, Terry, I want to ask you from the grassroots perspective, not the college perspective, what did the landscape look like for girls and young women in the 1960 to 1972 time period?
Thank you, Jill, and thank you for that that nice introduction. And really, perhaps the one thing you should add to that is I really am a product of Title IX. In the late 60s, I was graduating from high school, never having the chance to play interscholastic sport, and went on to the University of Tennessee to start my career and seek out a profession. And in the 60s, there were many young women like me that loved to play, loved all sports, but had minimal opportunities. There were hotbeds of sports in various areas of the US. For instance, the Northeast, New York, New Jersey was a hotbed for women's track and field through the club system, the AAU system. Also, basketball was a hotbed in various states at the high school level. On the West Coast was another hotbed of track and field and other team sports. And mostly that was through the AAU. Our Olympic teams of the 60s were women that were selected by being involved in clubs, and getting outstanding coaching and encouragement from men that were interested in seeing women get opportunities. So that's really where we started, and there was very minimal participation at the college level in the late 60s and early 70s as Title IX came about. And the people who were leading the charge in the collegiate scene were women that came out of physical education programs, were professors, instructors, and actually had some intramural club teams for women in a few colleges. So it was pretty bleak.
So Ken, when we were doing our prep and talking about the pre-Title IX era, you mentioned some experiences that you had at college yourself. Can you can you share that with our audience? If you come off mute.
Okay. How's that? I went to Drake in Des Moines, Iowa, and I was actually pretty shocked when I first saw a women's basketball game televised in their state championships, and you had offensive players and defensive players. They each played half-court basketball, and I was flabbergasted. I'd never seen that before. Maybe this was going on in Illinois. I don't think it was, but it just shocked me because I thought this is some different type of basketball. I'd never seen this before.
Thanks for sharing that with us. So Terry, you alluded to the fact, you started to talk about the impetus for the start of women's collegiate sports. And the audience today may be familiar with women being a part of the NCAA, but that wasn't the case pre-1972 and pre-1981. Do you want to tell us about how that all came about and whether there was pushback about women joining? To tell the audience a little bit about what that scene looked like in those years.
Well, yes, I mentioned that really the governance of women's collegiate sport came out of physical education departments across the country. And that was a group of spirited, committed women and some men included in that group that wanted to see these intramural teams in colleges develop into real collegiate teams. Obviously, in the early 70s, men's athletics was going gangbusters. It was a moneymaker. It was a crowd pleaser. It had great exposure. And certainly thanks to those people that wanted to start to give women those same opportunities, the group formed a governing body called the Association of Intercollegiate Women's Athletics, better known as AIAW. And one of the first things they did in organizing was to sponsor national championships. So that was a great incentive for colleges to start to gather their teams and their athletes, their women that wanted to participate, and start to form and organize with support, coaching, and financial support, athletes that wanted to go on and compete at a national level. In track and field, the first women's collegiate championship was in Denton, Texas, at Texas Women's University. That might be have a special meaning. And it was a very small meet and very few people in the stands, but I can tell you that the athletes that were there were enthusiastic. They competed hard. And it was just an opportunity for them to start to grasp their dreams of competing.
Thank you for that. So we're going to assume that there may be some people who have tuned in for this program who really know the term Title IX, but don't really necessarily know the true history to it and where it came from and what it's about. So we're going to just take a few minutes and I'm going to share my screen, and Professor Ferguson is going to give us a little brief tutorial on Title IX.
Yeah, this is a sort of a general overview of Title IX. In 1972, Congress amended the Civil Rights Act to pass Title IX, and Title IX had one paragraph that's significant. It says, no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefit of, or be subjected to discrimination under any educational program receiving federal assistance. And that started Title IX. Okay. Now, what we generally know as Title IX is really found in the implementing regulations that control Title IX and have that regulate colleges and other educational institutions. Go on. Okay. Now, one of the things I wanted to sort of give a broader view is it was clear that educational institutions must operate their programs to provide equitable opportunities for female student athletes. That meant they had to provide equal participation opportunities, they had to provide equal scholarships, and they had to make sure that student athletes, female student athletes, receive equal treatment. Now, an institution can demonstrate that they were providing these equitable participation opportunities by satisfying one of three tests. First is referred to the Proportionality Test. Essentially, it says that you're providing opportunities to student athletes in the same proportion that there are men and women in the general population. Secondly, if they can't satisfy that test, a university could look to satisfy the second test, which is there's been a history of program expansion. Now, today, an institution may be able to rely on that test, may not have been early on. And then, of course, the third test is that we've accommodated the interests of women, and we've provided those participation opportunities to them, so we don't have to do anything else. Go on. Now, the next slide talks about the obligation to provide scholarships. Okay, and so scholarship must be provided on an equitable basis. Not only would scholarships have to be provided on an equitable basis, then women student athletes and their teams must be treated equally. Okay, and this equal treatment, relates to a sort of a long list of things that you see here: equipment, scheduling, traveling. For example, the women student athletes should not be taking a bus when all the male student athletes are flying to their competition. The quality of the facilities, including locker rooms and so forth, are all factors that are considered when determining whether or not there was equal treatment. So that's the sort of general overview of Title IX. It's a lot more complex than I've presented it, but hopefully that gives a general overview of what Title IX is.
Thank you, Professor. So Terry, based on when Title IX was enacted in 1972, you were very involved around this time by then as a coach. What did you see start to happen with grassroots participation, which had been a big part of the participation prior to Title IX? How did things start to change when Title IX was enacted? And as a female coach of female athletes, did they remain self-governing in the IAWA, as you indicated, or did what started to happen?
Well, I've often said, as we look back on the 70s and Title IX, that Title IX was really the chisel that broke the glass ceiling for women that wanted to get into athletics. But it broke that glass ceiling, but that did not mean there wasn't tremendous amount of controversy. We only need to think back to the controversy that many of the brave administrators and athletes of that time created. For instance, Billie Jean King with her Virginia Slims tennis tour that wanted equal pay for the women pro tennis players, just like the men had. That was a huge controversy, but it was also a catalyst for other women to start to look at their opportunities and their lack of opportunities in the college ranks. And so it became a very contentious debate about, was AIW and the women administrators overseeing women's sports really able to take women's sports to a level that could be equal with men's sports, particularly in terms of funding. And so again, the battle lines were drawn as to who was in favor of keeping women's sports with the AIW versus a group of women administrators actually had to make a choice of really supporting the NCAA taking on the governance and the sponsorships for women's sports. After contentious debates in Congress and throughout the country, it was sort of a concession was made that the only way women's sports could go forward because of the financial resources needed to meet Title IX was to join with the NCAA. And so that's happened in the early 70s and throughout the 70s. And it was a huge struggle. As you heard Ken read off those requirements, in most cases, the requirements that Title IX listed were very threatening to men's athletic departments across the country. And there was a huge dilemma as to how these women's teams, which a lot of men didn't think could really be serious and well received by the public, should be funded. So even though it was very clear from the beginning that Title IX was about giving women and other underserved groups equal opportunities, it was a huge struggle. So that's really was what was happening in the 70s. Not all schools were eager to comply. They struggled to see how they could get around complying, and it created huge dissension and contempt in a lot of circles. But women were determined. And so little by little, scholarships were added to move up to the levels of men's services, equipment, travel budgets. All these things were a slow process. And the one thing I would add, though, just to finish this, is that women were thrilled just to be competing and starting to be treated like real athletes at the college level. So interesting enough, while it was quite contentious and a real struggle, I think our women athletes of that area were just thrilled to be putting on a uniform that said University of Tennessee or University of Texas or Princeton, or across the country, women were starting to have those opportunities that they had been really longing for.
So true. And when I left college campus in 1980, the NCAA had not yet taken over women's collegiate sports. And I want to let the audience know that we haven't forgotten about Bonita, but she's so young that we had to wait for the time period that we were talking about to catch up with her, because she was a young'un in those early years. And so, Bonita, what I understand from your coach is that you came to the University of Tennessee already as an Olympic athlete and as someone who was quite accomplished. So what was your awareness of Title IX when you walked onto a college campus athletic department or athletic track in 1981?
Yeah, I thank you, Jill, and great to see you both, Terry and Ken. It's always great to be with my coach, Terry. She and I are still very, very close to this day, and I just feel indebted to her for all the great experiences I had, both on and off the track, as a result of my relationship with her. So, yeah, she's a Hall of Fame coach, but she's a Hall of Fame friend and surrogate mom too. So I am, much like Terry was saying, she was, her coaching career was born of the Title IX movement. My entire sports career was born of the Title IX movement. I'm a Title IX baby. I started playing sports as pretty much the same year that Title IX was passed. And I grew up in Northern Virginia, and thankfully in Prince William County, they had embraced girls sports around that time, and we had a full slate of girls sports in middle school and high school. And I was telling Terry earlier that she and the athletic department at University of Tennessee, which actually still remained separate, women's athletic department and men's athletic department, until sometime in the past 5 to 7 years or so, when Joan Cronin retired, who was a longtime athletic director there, women's athletic director. Because of that, no, I was not aware of Title IX. I had no clue. My dad was my guidance counselor in high school, and he was the one that pushed me into majoring in engineering. He knew that Title IX had passed. He knew that more opportunities for female engineers were going to be opening up. And so he left me good for nothing to major, but to major in engineering by the time I finished high school, because he just did my class schedule with math analysis and calculus and physics on it in high school. So I majored in industrial engineering at the University of Tennessee. I was there on a full athletic scholarship, and for the first 2 years, that meant that you got tuition and were board, but no books. When I was able to go on visits, because of AIW, you could only do 3 visits, not 6, like the guys did. And so, but those limitations, I didn't understand the difference. And so it wasn't apparent to me. And when I got to Tennessee, whatever was going on in the background to get us to the point where we were in the NCAA, we won a national championship with the AIW. And then we got to go to the NCAA, and we were one of the top 2 or 3 teams perennially there at Tennessee. And so we got to travel for spring break. We go from Tennessee to California and spend a week and a half in hotel and train and compete. Terry sent me to Milrose games and the Pepsi meet and the Dallas meet. And she sent me all over the country to get the best competition, the best athletes on her team. She did the same for them. And so, yeah, I just felt like the world was at my feet. I could be anything I wanted to be. I could aspire to any career I wanted to aspire to. And to think that all of that happened just a few short years before those opportunities were availed to me. Now I know. I got involved with Women's Sports Foundation. I've been a past president on the board for many years. I've been advocating on the Hill for maintaining Title IX for many, many years. So certainly know it now, but no. When I was in high school, middle school, high school, and college, and soon thereafter, had no clue how blessed I really was.
So let me ask both Bonita and Terry, whichever one of you want to jump in. Let's start with Bonita. So you were an Olympian, right, before you got to college?
My freshman year, actually. My freshman year.
Your freshman year? Okay.
Yes.
So were you developed as an athlete through the grassroots sports system that Terry was talking about? Right.
Yeah, but really only the interscholastic system. Mm-hmm. I got to that. I was a top 5 in the country as a high school senior on the backs of just the training I got from my high school coach. And so I mean, thank God for Prince William County. Thank God for Garfield High School and Ruthie Brown, my coach. She took me and made sure I got good competitions in the summer, but I never did a junior Olympics competition. I only ran for a track club my junior and senior year in high school, and that was to go to junior nationals, and I made the US team and got exposure that way. And so the grassroots system, I think, existed then, but it was at the beginnings, I think, for girls. And so those opportunities didn't really avail themselves, but I was lucky enough to have a good enough coach in high school that, you know, got me to that level. And of course, that have the genetic makeup, I guess, that I needed.
So Terry, what was, as from a coaching perspective, you were there pre-Title IX, and you saw the grassroots development. So in the era leading up to Title IX and just after it, the athletes who made it onto the U.S. Olympic team in track and field, our sport, you know, what was the mix of the opportunity that Title IX provided mixed with grassroots, or how did you see that play out? How would you analyze that?
Well, certainly, as I mentioned, there were key locations across the country that were doing some fantastic development of women athletes. You know, our Olympic team speaks to that. You know, you can talk about softball teams, you can talk about basketball teams that were pre-Title IX that was producing great athletes, and as in track and field, like the Tiger Bells of Tennessee State, were making USA sport shine across the globe when we got to the Olympic level. But again, there were limited opportunities, and that's what I saw when Title IX was passed, that it could not, women participating in sports could not be ignored any longer. And that explanation Ken gave was outstanding, because the one thing that was really the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, was the fact that federal funds could be withheld from educational institutions. And that scared every college administrator across the country. So the monkey was on their back at that point to figure out how to meet the federal guidelines. And as I've already said, it was a struggle, and some were very hesitant to be compliant, where others were ready to jump in and really start to support women who wanted to participate in athletics.
Yes, and I just want to let those who have some questions know we're aware of your questions, and we will be getting to them shortly. So when Ken, or I should say Professor Ferguson, when we think about Title IX, a lot of the focus, at least from a sports perspective, is how it impacts the collegiate level. But Title IX isn't just about college sports, right? When you apply it to the sports context, and you've done some incredible scholarship in this area. And I just want to cite the name of your article. You've published a legal note entitled Achieving Gender Equity Under Title IX for Girls from Minority, Urban, Rural, and Economically Disadvantaged Communities. So can you explain to our audience how Title IX might impact those young women from low income and disadvantaged communities in their communities and coming into the college space?
Well, I think Title IX has already had a positive impact in that, you know, they have collegiate opportunities going forward in certain sports. And but my article really sort of dealt with a group of women, girls, that were negatively impacted, and it's much broader than just from an interscholastic standpoint as well, because as long as you were involved in sort of what you would call the traditional sports, track and field, basketball, there were opportunities for those women and minority women and girls up to the college level. But at the college level, there were other sports that were referred to as emerging sports, where there was not a presence of minority athletes in them. And in fact, what sort of motivated me to write the article, I was in a meeting. I'm also what's called a faculty athletics representative for the university, which means for matters related to academics and athletics, I'm involved at the university level. But one of the things I kept seeing in many of the meetings I was in, where there was legislation being proposed in the NC2A level, there's always be a little statement that says Title IX impact. Okay, and I asked the question. I said, well, what about the minority Title IX impact? And the response I received sort of highlighted what the problem from a conceptual standpoint was. The response was that, well, we've sort of solved the Title IX problem because, we're balancing the opportunities for women against football and those sports which have large numbers. But the opportunities that were being made available were for some of the emerging sports that were not available in minority urban communities at that point. So that the athletes who would be able to take advantage of those new opportunities couldn't, because those opportunities were not available at the scholastic level. And so one of the issues I raised in my article, and I won't go on too long about it, is that when a school district refuses to expand participation opportunities for all women, including girls of color, they're engaging in deliberate discrimination, and that's actionable under Title IX. At least that's my argument, that it's actionable under Title IX. And so you could intentionally discriminate, okay, so that you have to have this sort of mindset to discriminate, or you could be indifferent to the discrimination that's right in front of you. And that's one of the claims that I made, is that deliberate indifference to the lack of opportunities that were available to young girls of color and girls from disadvantaged and in some instances rural communities, that indifference is a form of discrimination that should be and can be remedied on the Title IX. Okay, so that was sort of the crux of using that argument to draw attention to where the problem was. And now we see that not only in terms of in the scholastic level as well. One of the issues that women are having is what you call conflating Title IX with minority gender equity, because oftentimes gender equity sometimes, and I think this is really starting to the Women in Sports Foundations and so forth are really starting to look at this really seriously, because there are minority women who are not getting the opportunities that are broadly available or that were designed to be available through Title IX. And so there's this new area of consideration or in terms of legal standpoint that we need to begin to look at and see whether or not we could solve some of those problems that exist.
How that has been explained to me, and I'll ask Benita and Terry if they have any comment on it, how this seems to be playing itself out is I have a friend who's a Black woman, a lawyer friend who's very involved in soccer. And she's indicated to me that in soccer, most of the elite players come from high economic backgrounds, because most of the soccer clubs for youth, you have to pay to be a part of the soccer club, and then the parents pay to travel around the country and all of that. So if colleges and universities have soccer programs for women, and then they add equestrian or tennis, tennis is a popular one, they add sports or water polo. If you come from a community as a youth or a high school player where you don't have access to equestrian, water polo, or soccer because your parents can't afford to pay for it, then there are more women and girls who are losing the opportunity to take advantage of Title IX. So Terry, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think as schools struggled, both at the interscholastic level and at the collegiate level, to open up opportunities for women in sport. I think this was sort of a curmudgeon they created because, yes, where were the masses competing, as you said, that they started more opportunities for women in sports where affluent suburban neighborhoods could support and had the resources to fund those club teams or school teams, whatever the case was. And as a result of seeing where the population was, then the NCAA, when they started to expand their championships, they looked at where were the populations at the collegiate level, where the athletes could come from. And so, yeah, it created sort of a subtle, and I say subtle because, and I can't really speak to whether it was intentional, so I'd like to think it was subtle discrimination, to Ken's point, because out of Black communities, you didn't see a lot of young Black women playing tennis or playing field hockey or swimming on a swim team or soccer, as mentioned. So yeah, I'd like to think it was a subtle discrimination, but you have to realize I came from a sport of track and field where Black athletes from the very beginning were the stars. And so it's hard for me to grasp the intent of that, but yes, I can very much understand it, and a very good point made.
So Benita, you're now a mother of a daughter, a teenage daughter who plays volleyball. And so now you have an opportunity to experience Title IX from a different perspective, how Title IX has impacted your daughter. And she's fortunate to have grown up with educated, affluent parents and have the opportunity. So do you see any issues, as Ken has identified, in this area?
Yeah, I was thinking about it. She has been primarily a volleyball player. About a year ago, she decided to focus on the sport where she had most of the genetic talent, I guess, in track and field. So she's made some great progress recently, and is being recruited to compete at the college level in track and field as well. I would say 100% that volleyball, soccer, hockey, field hockey, lacrosse, many of those sports that are played at the intercollegiate level are cost prohibitive, and volleyball is at the top of the list. And you're talking minimum $5,000 a year, but mostly upwards of $10,000 and $15,000 a year for your child to play with a competitive club and to also pay for the travel costs that go along with that. And so it's a challenge. And I have been CEO of Gloria Sport for Good Foundation, I think you mentioned earlier, and for 4 years. And we provided grants to sports-based youth development organizations, which are grassroots sports organizations, primarily in underserved communities, providing free or low-cost sports opportunities to kids in all sorts of sports. And but there are many organizations out there like that. But the challenge is, once they get beyond that kind of rec play and some of these grassroots sports organizations, you have to have access to these travel organizations or you get any notice at all to be able to go to college. So yes, there are many, many challenges with that and with diversifying those opportunities. The last thing I'll say, and I'm not sure, Terry, if you understand this, but I am running into, with Maya in the recruitment process, a lot of schools who put more of an emphasis on recruiting distance runners than they do sprinters. There are way more college programs that focus on distance. I think maybe it's because they're 3 sport athletes, cross country, indoor track, and outdoor track. That could be one reason. You could get a 3-for out of them. There are a plethora of events in those areas, although there are in sprints as well. But if the coach is a distance coach and they're the head coach or the director of track and field, I'm noticing that they have a tendency to be a distance school. And so they go focus on getting most of their points from distance athletes. And in America, most of the distance athletes are white and most of the sprinters are Black. And so I'm sensing that inadvertent discrimination is happening even in our sport, Terry.
No, I don't disagree with you. And again, like I said before, I think that's a lack of awareness on university athletic departments to see that, because so often in this day and age, and you talk about sorting out scholarships and funding and so forth, is that a particular coach has a specialty in an event area in track and field. And, you know, I don't know that this happens in basketball or soccer or volleyball, but in track and field particularly, yes, I can agree with you, because that coach will have a propensity toward a certain event area, and that's where they are going to invest the majority of their scholarship funds.
Yeah, we could go on and on about it, Terry, but you didn't do that. You didn't. You're a distance runner. Your specialty was middle distance and distance, and you developed a strong sprint, hurdle, jumps, throws. You had a very well-rounded program at every school you went to: Tennessee, Texas, Cal Poly. And
well,
so
it's a matter of philosophy. It really is a matter of philosophy and what the administration supports you in doing as a head coach. But you're right about that my personal philosophy as a track coach was I wanted a balanced team. I wanted all the events represented, and we wanted to win national championships with a balanced team, not just a sprint team or not just a distance team. So I agree with what the landscape looks like now. And again, I think it goes back to Ken's article, certainly is relevant in this day and age.
So we, as time moves on, sorry to, I didn't mean to cut you off, Terry. Did you have another final comment?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Just want to make sure that we bring together, as we have the closing minutes of this, and then allow to answer some of the questions that groups have. I'll have to compact and maybe skip some of the intended questions. So let's talk about this connection between women athletes being recruited to college campuses and participating on college campuses, and the Olympic teams that the United States puts forward. So let me start with you, Bonita, because you made a comment when we were planning about this, about the impact of females on the medal count. So why don't you lead and comment on that?
Yeah, we just finished Beijing Olympic Winter Games, and just 7 months earlier, we're in Tokyo for the year delayed 2020 Olympic Games. And in both cases, and for Team USA anyway, the women won the vast majority of the medals. They won 13 of 17 medals in Beijing. They won 6 gold, 4 silver, 3 bronze. So they won more gold than the guys did. By the numbers, they were about just under half of the Olympic team in the winter, but they were a larger 54% of the summer Olympic team in Tokyo, and also won 23 of 39 gold medals there, 66 of 113. So the women, and in these sports, winter, not so much. They don't have so many, I mean, they have collegiate ski teams for sure in many schools that have snow. But I don't think University of Miami has a ski team. But for the summer games, for sure, the teams that we've been rattling off have all been fueled by Title IX and the opportunities that have accrued to us from college. So there's a direct, bottom line is there's a direct correlation between the impact of Title IX on U.S. Women and girls and their participation in sport and their ability to continue through the collegiate system, which is quite frankly the envy of the world. Most other countries don't have an intercollegiate system that we have. We have it at the JUCO level all the way up through the 4-year in university, and they don't have that. It's all, grassroots and club based in Europe and Asia. And so, it's bearing out for sure in our Team USA performance.
And I would add, in other countries, they have national sports programs that support their Olympic, their national athletes.
But only the very top.
Yeah, and the government has a sports ministry that pays for it. So Terry, you've seen the whole spectrum of this, right? So how have you seen change or similarity over, 1960s to 2022, and with respect to how Title IX has impacted how women make or show up on Olympic teams? Do you share Bonita's viewpoint?
Well, I do. Obviously, I've always said for a large part of my career that as women's sports became a center part of athletic departments across the country, women's sports and men's sports as well became the farm team of the Olympic team. Just like baseball has their farm teams where they develop the athletes that then move up to the majors. That's what our college programs have done for the Olympic movement. They provided a place, supported them with funding, coaching, travel, just helped them develop their potential. And then they went to the Olympic trials and all these Olympic sports and went on to represent USA. So yes, I think that's been a very positive impact on the Olympic movement, and has certainly been, I think, the #1 contributing factor to USA being the #1 Olympic team in the world. And so there has to continue to be this collaboration between collegiate sports and the USOC, PC, as we move forward with the Olympic movement. And that's been a conversation that's been going on between those two parties for quite a few years, because certainly collegiate athletic programs would like to see a part of that funding that helps those athletes get to the Olympic Games come from the NCAA, or perhaps from our federal government. As Bonita, I think, referred to, all the the USOC funds that support our Olympic teams are fundraised. There is no federal funding coming to our Olympic sports system, which is different from the rest of the world. So yes, there's a definite need for more collaboration. And the last thing I would say, though, is that there's yet lots of work to be done, and to use Title IX as that incentive, as that weapon. I think that's a harsh term. I don't prefer to use that, but as a positive to create those opportunities, because as we just seen in the recent time, our women's professional soccer team that has had a more outstanding record than their male counterparts for years have finally been able to get equal funding. So we still have many barriers to address when it comes to opportunities for women athletes and being equal to what our male athletes receive.
So let me jump to Ken and talk about, in the context of what Terry and Benita just said, a footnote would be athletes like Allison Felix, right? Allison Felix became a phenom in high school as a track and field athlete, and didn't, as far as I am aware, do the college scholarship route. She went right ahead and turned professional and was able. So I'm going to start with Ken, but then go around the Zoom room and ask, do you see that, particularly with NIL coming into play? And it seems like high school as well as college athletes having the opportunity to directly earn money. Do you think that's going to change the equation for the relationship between college sports for women and the pathway to the Olympic team? What do you think, Ken?
Well, I hadn't thought about this before, but it could. But part of it has to do not only with having access to resources, but on one level, you've got to have the talent. The reason why Allison Felix went the way she did is, and she got her college education, but she just didn't compete on the collegiate level. But not everybody could take that route, and not everybody could reach that level of competition that early in their career. And so for many people, they need to go through that sort of farm system as Terry talked about. But so yes, I think this name and image likeness may be a potential source of income that it opens up doors for some athletes. But at the end of the day, you've got to have the talent to be able to compete at that level. So I don't know if that answers your question.
But yes, very quickly, Bonita and Terry, and then we're going to answer some audience questions if we have more than one, but we have one right away. But go ahead. Do you think NIL is going to change the equation of the symbiosis between Title IX and the Olympic teams for women? Bonita?
I think it just gives women more opportunities to stay in the sport longer and to compete at higher and higher levels and pay for the resources they need to train and compete and get everything they need. Some may end up wanting to bypass the college system altogether if they are able to garner those resources on their own. But there's such prestige in competing for schools. I think it's going to be a long time before there's a pretty significant impact, I think.
Terry, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with Benita. I don't think there's going to be this mass exodus to follow some of our pro athletes right out of high school. I think it's really important for parents, the athlete themselves, to really consider the well-being and the emotional development of an athlete coming out of high school. Just as we've seen the success of an Allison Felix, and there's several other in sports around the country that turned pro immediately out of high school. I think that whole farm team mentality of development really works well for that 18-year-old, and they can start to explore their opportunities to turn their successes and their personalities into financial resources. And that's something that, was a hard fought battle within the NCAA. So now that it's happening, I'm hearing about college athletes that have these great Instagram pages and endorsements and so forth. So I don't think our college teams will suffer that much from it. And again, I think the bottom line is the welfare of the athlete. What's best for that athlete?
So we have a question that was put in the chat a while ago when you were talking initially, Terry, about the separate women's governance of sport at the collegiate level. So I'll read the question. Given the challenges that several national governing bodies and NCAA institutions have experienced in providing equitable opportunities and support for female athletes, does it make sense to consider returning to a development model that has separate groups for the sexes, both in the Olympic movement and at the college level? Terry?
That'd be a quick answer from me. I would say absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
I think the exposure now that women have gotten, when you can now go to a women's basketball game and see the arena at capacity, and then maybe the men play tomorrow and might not be at capacity, and the publicity that women's sports, women's coaches are getting, all that is really the evolution of women really sort of getting the due they deserve. And so, no, I think that would be very difficult. Not that there's not good leadership in our women administrators, but from a financial sponsorship standpoint, I think it would not be a very smart move.
Benita, your thought?
I agree. I think we need to stick it out. The athletes need to stick it out in the intercollegiate system. I think it's really the best system for them, particularly now with the flexibility through the name and image and likeness. What I was going to say is that I think that the model that University of Tennessee had with the separate men's and women's athletic departments, and at that time they still had separate men's and women's track teams, a head coach for the men and a head coach for the women, and even though we trained at the same time and often traveled together, they were two separate programs. And I think that system was beneficial for women. I think when you have a male athletic director overseeing all the programs, I know it's more economically sound for the university not to have to duplicate positions and efforts for the men and for the women, but there are probably some benefits that accrue to the women as a result of being underneath the men's program. But I think just the decision making, having women first and front and center when you're making those decisions, and not making decisions for football that have to flow back down to women's rowing or track and field or soccer, having more opportunities for women to advance their careers as coaches and become head coaches and become directors of track and field. Again, back to this recruiting situation that I'm in with my daughter, 90% of the head coaches that she's talking to are male. 90% of the sprint coaches that she's talking to are male. And then again, back to the thing about distance versus most of the co-head coaches are distance coaches. They're not sprint coaches. And so there are these subtle issues that have now come along when before Title IX, 90+% of coaches of female athletes were women. 90+% of administrators of female athletic departments were women. And once Title IX passed, we are far fewer than 50% of head
Wow.
coaching jobs
Mhm.
are going to women. That's high school and college.
So go ahead, Benita.
Yeah, so I'm saying that I think there is some course correction that needs to happen, but I think you can't undo everything. And I think it's better for us to be under the huge behemoth that is the NCAA than to try and break off and do something on our own at this point.
Thank you for that. So we could continue this conversation, of course, for another hour, but we are over our time, and so I am going to pass things back to Pam Lester on behalf of the Sports Lawyers Association, but I want to thank this panel. You have provided a wealth of just rich and important information for the audience that's live and for those who will see this program on demand later. And I thank you all so much for taking the time to share your knowledge and experience. To you, Pam.
Thank you, Jill. And I also want to thank you, Jill, for putting together such a great program and moderating it so well. And also Professor Ferguson and Terry and Bonita. This has been fantastic. I thank you for your time and your insights. I personally would be back for part 2. I'm someone who graduated from high school in 1976. And, if I benefited from Title IX, well, that's a different discussion. But anyway, thank you everyone for being in attendance today. And for those of you who came in late, you can see a replay of this program and all the others that we're doing for Title IX on the Sports Lawyers website, www.sportslaw.org. Go to events and then Title IX. And we are planning a program on Title IX and NIL in April. And of course, our annual conference, we're going to be back in person, May 12th through 14th in Atlanta, Georgia. And we hope to see all of you then. And again, I just want to say thank you to everyone. Fascinating discussion. And I've learned so much. Professor Ferguson, I'm looking forward to reading your article. And thanks again, Professor Ferguson and Terry and Bonita and Jill and Melissa, who's the genius behind the controls, and all of you who've been here today. So thanks so much. Take care, everyone.
Let me say thank you to Jill.
Thank you.
For all that you've done. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.